Hi, Misha here. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been able to do a video. Personal things, maybe I'll explain in a black box, but in the end, all's well. Today, hey, I like MiGs, you like MiGs, so let's talk about some MiGs, specifically the MiG-29, and more specifically, a couple of the new ones from Hobbymaster. These are all 1/72 scale diecast metal, and Hobbymaster really only got into the MiG-29 game at the end of 2019, although I don't believe they really started to appear here to the beginning of this year, 2020. I'm recording this for whatever it's worth on New Year's Eve 2020, so only a few hours left in this wonderful, wonderful year. Although I don't know when I'll publish this video. So, anywho. In the past, I did show you with the old camera. This one. This is a MiG-29S from Russia. This is kind of a second generation. But I really want to talk about the variants today. We have a MiG-29A. This is from former East Germany, DDR. And then we'll wrap up with the newest one that just came out that I got from Pete's Collectibles. In fact, I think, yeah, all of these came from Pete's Collectibles. This is the MiG-29SMT. And this is pretty much cutting edge for the 29 series. And it is kind of a new tooling, or at least a pretty good modification of the existing tooling from Hobbymaster. All pretty neat. All have gear up or down, canopy open closed, pilot in out. They all come with stands. I like these. The stem is metal. The base is plastic, but the stem is metal, which gives good weight. And they slot in. They don't cradle. I think it's more aesthetically appealing and stable. The only downside is you can't put it in the center run fuel tank, but oh well. And these are pretty neat little models. And they come with extra ordnance, at least 2 out of the 3 do. And they even give you a couple of spare antennae, I don't know. So in case you lose or break one, I always like when they give a spare. And they have a few little other options for configuration. In the past, I've shown you some of the JC Wings MiG-29s in this scale. There have also been some Witty Wings and even some Corgis. But Hobbymaster really has taken it to another level. So let's talk about each variant and each model on the spinny thingy. So here we are. This is an early MiG-29. It's a product 9.12A. MiG-29A. Fulcrum A. Lots of A's. And this isn't going to be a long history video, but this dates back to kind of 1950s and 60s Cold War brinksmanship and one-upsmanship. You know, we had the MiG-15 versus the F-86, which led to the MiG-17 and then the MiG-19 to go up against the F-100 Super Sabre. And then America introduced the F-4 that was seen to good effect in Vietnam, and this caused Russia to develop the MiG-23 to counter it. Russia had also been working on the MiG-25, which is actually earlier than the 23, and that actually caused America to start the FX program, which resulted in the MiG-15. And it was this, the MiG-15, and also, one can surmise, the MiG-15, the F-15, and the, I'm a little rusty, apologies, I'm just getting better. And the F-14 for the Navy, that caused Russia to want a new fighter. In the late 60s, they ordered something that was pretty much a do-all air superiority fighter. It needed short field performance, beyond visual range capability, all kinds of stuff. But in 71, they realized this was just too much. So they split it into two. A long-range, heavy, kind of more of a strategic air superiority fighter. This would become the Sukhoi Su-27, which had its own family. And a lightweight, tactical fighter interceptor kind of point defense, which became the MiG-29. And work began throughout the early 70s, and it was pretty well underway by 74, 75, and the earliest prototype flew in 77. And by 81, it was ready to go. And by 82, it was adopted. And by 83, it was in full-scale production. And they had several versions, as Russia was wont to do. The basic 9.2, the basic 9.12 was for Russia. The 9.12A was for export to Warsaw Pact, and the 9.12B was for non-Warsaw Pact export. Now, the 9.12 was an air superiority fighter. The basic difference between the 12 and the 12A was that the 12A had a slightly downgraded radar and capabilities, but more importantly could not carry nuclear weapons, whereas the 12 could. The 12B was more severely restricted with an even more limited radar and capabilities, and of course, no nuclear capability, and it did not carry ECMs at all. So what do we have here? Well, this is a truly lightweight fighter. It's slightly bigger than F-16, but it's much smaller than an F-15. And many say this was, a competition for the F-16, but it really wasn't. The F-16 was a multi-role kind of economy fighter to complement the F-15, which was an air superiority. The MiG-29 was designed as an air superiority. That's it. No ground attack. So size-wise, yeah, it's similar to an F-16. It's a little bit faster. It can go past Mach 2.2, whereas the F-16 is limited to Mach 2 or a little under, depending on the variant. And it has slightly higher altitude, better climb. Where the MiG-29 really shines, it's very good when it comes to maneuverability, agility, especially at low speeds, and of course it does the Cobra maneuver. What they did, though, it was kind of old meets new. The airframe was brand new. It had some of Russia's newer weaponry. It had 2 medium-range air-to-air missiles that were beyond visual range, and then it had up to 4 short-range missiles. And it had 2 very, very good afterburning engines. But the radar initially used in the 29A was an improved version of that found in the MiG-23. So it wasn't really new tech. Likewise, the cockpit was pretty basic, pretty analog. And they did this not just for budgetary reasons, but also because it would help with conversion training. They didn't want to give a quantum leap from the 23 to the 29. This would make conversion. And a lot of air forces would go straight from a 21 to a 29 even, as the 23 had been less than successful. And originally, the 29 had a pretty short range. You have an internal tank here, and they could carry 1 belly tank. It had a cannon with 150 rounds, but the problem with the early version, if you had the belly tank installed, you couldn't fire the cannon because it blocked the ejection port, which, yeah, could have issues. So originally, yeah, we had 6 missiles, 2 medium for short range, and 1 cannon. Relatively short range, very good performance, but a pretty basic cockpit. Nothing flashy there. Pretty basic hydraulics, too, for whatever that's worth. But it was quite popular. And this initial version, they would build around 150. Again, they would have a few different versions. And by the mid-80s, this was in pretty widespread Soviet use, and it was really first seen up close and personal by the West in 1986. East Germany here, which this plane is a model of, first acquired the MiG-29 in 1988. They would pick up 20 of these, the A model single seat, and 4 of the MiG-29UB, known as the Flanker B by NATO, 2-seat trainers, although the trainers were combat capable. And these would be all delivered by 1989, and of course then the Berlin Wall would fall. Now interestingly, these would form 2 squadrons briefly under the DDR. These would fall under the auspices of the West German Luftwaffe by 1992, and would originally be kept as 2 independent squadrons. But in 1993, they were reorganized into 1 squadron and would continue to fly in NATO exercises throughout the 90s. And this really gave them a chance to go up against the F-15, the F-16, and even the F-A-18 Hornet. And it was interesting. They reported this was a more maneuverable, more agile plane, again at lower speeds especially. More of a performance plane, but it was definitely a more basic cockpit. The NATO aircraft had better avionics, were more flexible, and they reported that the Russian missiles for short range were actually superior to Sidewinders of the 80s and even 90s vintage, but the medium range, beyond visual range missiles were actually inferior, which would make sense based on the radar used. It was just interesting. It has to be noted that one of the 24 aircraft, it was an A, crashed in 1996. It was declared to be a pilot error. They considered using these over Kosovo in 1999, but decided not to. This was always thought to be a point defense aircraft, not just in East Germany, but even in Russia. This really wasn't an offensive aircraft, at least initially. This was to defend airfields. Remember, the Sukhoi Su-27 was the long-range heavy guy. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me in principle of the English Electric Lightning. Anyway, by the 21st century, the cash-strapped German Luftwaffe was getting ready to kind of retire out its MiG-29s because of maintenance costs. And so, they agreed to sell these for €1 each to Poland. This agreement was struck in 2002, and between 2003 and 2004, of the remaining 23 aircraft, 22 were given to Poland. 1 was kept in Germany for museum display, where it resides to this day. So this is the reason I wanted this model, is because it is a good example of an early 29A. Notice it has a pretty flat back, very minor fuel tank hump here. The antennae is very close to the cockpit. And yeah, it has the original engines and the original air-to-air only weaponry. And hey, since I don't have the fuel tank installed, it can actually use its cannon, so that's good, right? It was in the wing route, by the way. And this is a really neat model. The ordnance fit very well, and the gear door fit very nice and tight with very little gap. Very happy with this one. It's mostly metal. The tail fins are plastic, and they do that not really because they want to be cheap, although I'm sure it's always helpful, but because they're so thin on this model. If you made them out of metal, they'd be kind of blocky. But the wing is metal, the body's metal. And that's our East German, later German, and even later, Polish MiG-29A, Fulcrum A, product 9.12A. Hey, I got it right that time. But let's look at the original model I picked up. The MiG-29S. Fulcrum C, reporting name in NATO. Product 9.13. And this version was only made for the Soviet Union, for the Russian Air Force. Yeah, the MiG-29 was a good aircraft, but the A was the first version, and they knew some of its shortcomings, and the S was meant to address them. This is the first to have a bit of a hump back here. If you notice, the antenna is moved further back. This is to make room for a bit more fuel and better ECM equipment. Also to help with range, it could carry the centerline tank and 2 additional tanks, one under each inner pylon here. And it could carry and fire the cannon with the tanks installed. They moved the ejection port, although the rounds would be reduced from 150 to 100, at least in some versions. This was still an air superiority fighter for the most part. It was given limited ground attack capability, but I do mean limited. It could carry unguided bombs, rockets, that kind of thing. They did improve the beyond visual range missiles it carried, and along with that, it went to a new, more powerful, more capable radar. Like I said, it had more capable ECM. It also had a more advanced cockpit with better display. It had 4 computers. It was more stable. It had a better hydraulics system. Just generally speaking, better ergonomics for the pilot, although still not what you consider super modern, but, you know, hey. And they would work on this version throughout the 80s, introducing it in Russia in 1988. This particular model is of an aircraft originally built in 1990, and this is as it appeared in 2000-2001. So this is the kind of second generation where they tried to address the range, a bit of pilot convenience and whatnot, better missiles, a little bit of ground attack as a secondary role, but it's still not a fighter bomber. It's still mostly a fighter and a point defense type interceptor. And this is really what Russia ran with. Even most of their 29As were either given away to allies or updated to the 29S standard here. They did eventually make a export version known as the 29C, which retained the name Fulcrum C. And much like the others, it was just simply downgraded features and couldn't carry nukes and that kind of thing. And this is pretty much what they rolled with for a very, very long time, because shortly after this was introduced, of course, the Soviet Union would collapse in 1991, so budgets were limited. They did do the 29SM, product 9.13M, same aircraft, except it had an improved radar and for ground detection, and it could fire guided air-to-surface missiles, or it could fire laser or TV-guided bombs. So a little more advanced in the attempt to make this more of a multi-role fighter. Not surprising considering the post-Cold War climate. But this was a good attempt. And some of these are still in Russian Air Force, but they left it a very long time. I will say that the MiG-29 was not designed to have a lot of airframe hours. Only about 2,500 to 3,000 max before a total rebuild. Now, with the S, they did reinforce the airframe. That was to carry the extra fuel tankage, but also had more strain on it. The payload was increased from around 3,500 kilograms up to about 4,000. Not bad for a little, fighter, 8,800 pounds for what it was. But by 2008, Russia was experiencing many crashes of MiG-29s. Now, part of this was increased military training, but part of it was they were just getting old and wearing out. So they grounded the entire fleet in April. They would clear them to fly 10 months later in February of 2009, but of the nearly 200 that were still considered operable, over 90 had to be grounded for major maintenance and updates because their airframes were stressed and corroding, and so only about 100 were really safe to fly in 2009 in Russia. And this didn't really line up with Putin's new directive. This was the first model that I had. It probably looks very similar to the A, and it is, because a lot of its updates, like to the cockpit and electronics and whatnot. You can see that the antenna is in a different position, and there's more of a hump, more of a bulge behind it. There's also a little bit of different detailing under the wings, but it still has the air-to-air missiles. And it's a neat model. This was the first one they released. I'm glad they released a Russian. The only gripe I have, and I can easily fix it, is that the doors for the rear wheels fit very tight, but they don't really pop in. This is a very difficult piece because of its shape. And that's the case with other brands too. And like I said, they fixed it with the later models, like the A here. So they addressed it, but they're just a little bit oversized. I just need to go in and see if there's a burr. But I'd rather them oversize it and where I can kind of sand it to fit smooth, then undersize it where it continues to fall out, and then one day I realize it's missing and I'm pissed off because I don't know where it fell. Well, let's look at the newest model and the newest member in the Russian Air Force. The MiG-29SMT. And it seems like this is still called the Fulcrum C. The D is the navalized MiG-29K. This could be lumped in with the Fulcrum E's, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a product 9.17. 9.15 was actually the 29M, a pretty radically modernized MiG-29. Russia wanted to either update its existing MiG-29 fleet or buy the 29M, or simply just replace it altogether. But other aircraft received priority around 2010-2012. This would include updating the Su-27 fleet, new programs like the Su-35 and eventually Su-57, and even MiG's own. Well, they looked at the MiG-31, MiG-33, MiG-35, quite a few. But in the end, money and the MiG-29 kind of just got pushed to the back. But crashes continue to happen, and so something had to be done. So finally, they kind of went with this program here. The MiG-29SMT could either be a brand new built fighter, or could be an update of existing MiG-29Ss or even 29As. And it's a little unclear how many Russia fields today. One of the earliest orders was for 16 new builds back in 2014. And it seems like they might have acquired a few dozen more and updated some other airframes. What we do know is by September of 2017, the SMT was being fielded in Syria, where it has been used for bomber escort and for close air support and for its own strike bombing attack missions. So what do we have here? We're kind of continuing the trend. Started with the S and SM. We have a further enlarged hump for more avionics and more fuel, a larger fuel tank here on the spine. We have a much more modern cockpit. We have 2 color displays and 2 monochrome. We have uprated, more powerful engines now. And that's so it can carry a heavier payload. This is up to 4,500 kilograms. And this is really the first true multi-role, although you could argue maybe the 29SM is as well. Anyway, this is the first production multi-role type where it could carry guided air-to-surface missiles, bombs, or of course, regular air-to-air ordnance as well. And I probably should have put 2 short-range missiles on the wing and only one of these 2 ground attack, but I think it looks cool this way. It's my model, and this way I can display it with both an air-to-surface bomb and air-to-surface missile. Hey, it can carry it, I hope. I still have 2 defensive missiles on the wings, and it still has the 30mm cannon for defense or ground attack. And so this is the newest 29 variant in Russian service. They have attempted to export these to a few nations or update a few nations' aircraft, but they've only met with limited success. And this was an update very much overdue. The last aircraft were from the late 80s, early 90s, truly. And so they desperately needed new builds or a complete overhaul of existing airframes. And this is doubly so considering Russia has become more militarily active in the last 5 years, which explains why they've had so many crashes since 2015 of existing MiGs. And at least one of these was shot down by a Turkish missile this year, 2020. So they are active combat. It is still very much a 4th generation jet. And it is, of course, showing its age. But then again, the F-16 is even older and still very much in service. Funnily enough, in Poland, the MiG-29 and F-16 fly side by side. Anywho, this is the newest model. It's kind of a sub-product line because it is a different body shape and comes with pretty radically different ordnance. And the details are very different, like the tail fins are a little different. And this is one I was really hoping they would do. I guess it goes without saying it has updated radar and avionics, new computers, that kind of thing. So yeah, the 3rd generation, if you will. A lot of the technology in the SMT was derived from the MiG-29M program, product 9.15, but not all. Like, they didn't go full fly-by-wire, full liquid crystal display. They didn't do that. But the 29 SMT can carry NATO weapons in addition to just Russian, so that is both good for export and operability if it ever comes to it. And what's neat about this model, this is kind of a first for Hobbymaster, the A, and since it's so similar, the S, like I said at the beginning, we've seen these from other makers, Corgi, Whitty, JC Wings, but I don't know that really many have done the SMT. For example, back when Whitty was around, the SMT really wasn't even out yet, aside from maybe like a concept. And even Corgi doesn't seem to have done a MiG in a few years. And this one is, you know, modern Russian. It does come with the same 4 short-range missiles and air-to-airs, so you get a lot of ordnance. That's one thing I like about Hobby Master. With first editions, you usually get just whatever ordnance hangs under their wings. But as editions go on, they usually continue to give you the original ordnance, if it's applicable. Plus, they keep adding more to it. So, you just get more and more and more. To date, MiG has produced around 1,600 plus MiG-29s, although production is officially ongoing. And again, it's kind of bled over into other programs too. The navalized version hasn't had a whole lot of success, but to be fair, neither has the Su-33. And Russia definitely has a lot of new fighters. It seems like Sukhoi has kind of taken over the fighter game. But MiG is still hanging in there, which is kind of only right for Russia, frankly. Well, since 2 of these are new, and the other one was with the old camera, I thought it seemed like a really good time for a MiG-29 video. What do you think? Right now, Hobby Master also has a Polish version out, and they're coming out with a Hungarian, an Indian Air Force, a North Korean Air Force, a Czech Air Force, and even an Iranian Air Force marked one. But these are pretty much all 29As, although I think the Indian version's a 29B, which physically will look pretty much identical. I don't know if they've done a 2-seater or have plans to yet, but I hope they will one day. Moreover, I hope they end up doing a 31, or even a 33 or 35 just for fun. So what would you like to see in this line? Any variants or interesting patterns you'd like to see? Let me know. And I'm back. Apologies for maybe being a little rusty, but, you know, hey. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, feel free to comment. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.